Hi, I'm David Boje and happy to meet you. And I want to talk to you about GrowthOD and how it's kind of the cutting edge of organizational development. So I want to give you a little bit of history and build up to this claim. And here it goes. So we start with organizational development. Where did it come from? Well, I think the father of OD has to be Kurt Lewin, a German-American psychologist, developed the foundational theories in the 1930s and 1940s. His work on group dynamics, leadership styles, and change processes emphasized how groups influence individual behavior and organizational outcomes. His contributions, like the old unfreeze, change, refreeze model, nobody pays much attention to it. It's too linear, it's too static. It doesn't quite do it. In 47, Lewin and his colleagues conducted the first T group ever at the National Training Lab. And by the way, I was trained by Mark Sandberg, who trained at the National Training Lab, and I was a professor at UCLA with a lot of the people that some had worked with Kurt Lewin, who was a lab assistant, Joan Lasco. Others who were still active doing T groups. I won't mention their names because it's kind of faded away. That Hawthorne studies happened in the 1920s and 1930s. Western Electric's Hawthorne works. They revealed the impact of the human factor and social factors and group norms. And whatever you paid attention to the workers, whatever you did, you turned the lights up, you turned the lights down, paid more or less attention to them, a productivity got better and better. So let's switch gears now. The 1940s and 1950s, you have the emergence of the OD as a field. Post World War II, the context, right, saw rapid industrial growth in the United States and a need for organizations to adapt to complex social and technical systems. This created a demand for systematic approaches, systems theory, right, to improve workplace dynamics and productivity. Second, you had action research. Lewin's introduced action research himself. So Kurt Lewin did a lot of cool things. A collaborative process of diagnosing organizational issues, implementing solutions, and evaluating outcomes. It's that collaborative process that I want to talk to you about and bring it back here in 2025. This iterative approach became the core of OD methodology, emphasizing data-driven decision-making and stakeholder involvement. You also had, in the 1940s and 50s, the Tavistock Institute. London developed the socio-technical systems, right? Emery and Trist got together after that. Initially, it was Trist, Eric Trist. The technical aspects, the human aspects, structural aspects integrated in the socio-technical. The old coal mining studies, right, highlight the importance of aligning work systems with human needs, influencing OD's more holistic approach. From there to the 1950s and 1960s, you have the growth of OD practices. Sensitivity and training groups were still happening. Lewin's work at NTL refined the T group as a tool for improving interpersonal communication and leadership skills. By the 1950s, these were widely adopted in corporate settings to foster team cohesion and self-awareness. Secondly, survey feedback method in the 1950s, researchers like Rene Likert developed the survey, the Likert scale feedback method, where employees' surveys were used to diagnose organizational issues and guide interventions. This data-driven approach became a staple of organizational development, emphasizing employee input in change processes. Some of the key figures in the 1950s and 60s were Douglas McGregor, one of the first theories you learned in management. Theory X, mechanistic, top-down, instrumental, or Theory Y, humanistic oriented, participation, management styles, whether you X or Y, advocating more employee empowerment and trust-based leadership was the way to go, which aligned with org development's humanistic values. Chris Argyris in the 1950s and 60s explored organizational learning system and the gap between espoused theories, what people say, and the theories in use, right? And whatever they do is what the theory in use. His work on double loop learning, single loop learning, Argyris and Schoen, when I was a professor at UCLA in the late 70s and mid 80s, everybody wanted to do a Chris Argyris and Schoen dissertation and figure out single loop and double loop learning. Also in the 1950s and 60s, Management by Objectives with Peter Drucker, 1954. MBO emphasized goal setting, alignment between individual and organizational objectives, influencing OD's focus on performance improvement. That was amazing, right? Now we move ahead. In the 1970s and 80s, what happened to organizational development? Well, it was more strategic expansion, more systematic relationships and interventions, and it marked a shift from the small group orientation of a task leader, a relationship leader, and team building, etc. And you started to see interventions driven by economic pressures. And we can start listing Henry Saval's and the socioeconomic approach, who took sociotech and turned it on its ear, combining an accounting and an economic perspective. Key approaches of the time in the 70s and 80s were open system planning, developed in the 1970s, emphasized aligning organizations with their external environment. Lansing and Pfeffer's External Control of Organizations in the late 70s, their book came out. Demand for internal capability to guide strategic change, the boundary spanning era. Socio-technical systems, building on Tavistock Institute's work, the coal mining study. Intervention, integrated social, human, technical process, technology, etc. It still weren't up to looking at economic accounting system, etc. But it was a big movement. Hey, number 4 on the hit parade was the quality of work life. I remember quality of work life, and it led to later the work-life balance work. Approach focused on improving employees' well-being and productivity through job redesign. Wow, that was a big deal in the days when I was a doctoral student, my early career as an OD professor. Participative management, better work environments, etc. Workplace dissatisfaction and labor movements were balanced with the quality of working life. Then came total quality management, emerging in the 1980s, involved principles of quality control, emphasizing continuous improvement, and that came from the Japanese influence, Kanban and the rest of it, Kairos, total involvement, etc. But this TQM movement I'm talking about, with thinkers like W. Edward Deming, TQM became a precursor to modern process improvement methodologies. So that brings us to the 1990s and 2000s. Now we have globalization, technology, large-scale change. The 90s and 2000s saw OD adapt to rapid globalization, technological advancements, the birth of the internet, etc., cell phones. You had agility was a big focus. Amandine Saval and her group in the socioeconomic approach to management did a book on agility. Several other books have come around too. And it's looking at large-scale system change, leadership development, diversity, but an agile, able to adapt organization. Now, key in the 1990s and 2000s, appreciative inquiry, with David Cooper-Ryder and Shristeva in the late 1980s, gained prominence in the 1990s. I remember in the Academy Management going to their sessions, AI, right? I think it was the Death by Chocolate group, a lot of chocolate, usually right across the hall from Brigham Young, which had ice cream. It was interesting to go and have very quiet ice cream in Brigham Young's halls celebration at the Academy and then go over and have Death by Chocolate, at the Case Western group and all the appreciative inquiry people. 1990s saw a learning organization with Peter Singay's, another attempt at it, with the fifth discipline. Introduced the concept again of learning organization, emphasized system thinking, shared visions, continuous learning, and adapt to change. OD practitioners use the framework to build adaptive, knowledge-driven organization. That's it. We could mention Carl Weick started to evolve in this time with his approach to sense making and the learning organization. We had new change management models like John Cotter's 8-step change process, 1996, provided a structured framework for leading large-scale transformation, integrating OD's principles with strategic execution. My problem with the Cotter model is very linear and it's very simplistic. Follow these steps, make a big change to a very complex adaptive system, go fish. Finally, in the 1990s and 2000s, the diversity inclusion model, OD began addressing workplace diversity, equity, inclusion, so-called DEI, used interventions like diversity training, cultural audits, inclusion, leadership development to foster equitable workplaces. Right now in 2025, DEI is politically incorrect in the United States and some other countries as well. However, I know the True Storytelling Group is still doing it. I'll have more to say about that in another section. Let's go up to 2010 to 2025. Again, it's agility, but now it's digital transformation. It's human-centric innovation. Since 2010, OD has responded to the digital age and more agile methodologies and a focus on employee experience, sustainability, resilience. The rise of remote work, all right, all the AIs now, ChatGPT, a whole bunch of them now. There's quite a variety of AI agents, and OD emphasizes rapid prototyping, cross-functional collaboration, continuous feedback to enhance organizational agility. The problem here is it leads to a lot of short-term adaptation. Digital transformation has its ups and downs. OD supports organizations in adopting digital tools, cloud computing, data analytics, aligning technology, human systems, culture, processes with kind of integrated softwares. System includes upskilling employees and redesigning workflows. No, you've had a lot of employee experience focus. OD shifted towards designing holistic employee experiences, kind of like experience marketing, integrating well-being, engagement, development, attract and retain talent in competitive markets. Right now, there's a lot of turnover among millennials who don't find these workplaces very supportive of sustainability. We'll get to that in a second. Not really the holistic employee experiences that they were led to believe. So they have a lot of turnover, and it's like $1 billion industry, replacing millennial employees, training new employees, trying to attract them, train them, etc. Positive organizational scholarship, building on appreciative inquiry, POS, focuses on fostering positive emotions, resilience, thriving workplaces, emphasizing strength-based leaderships, employee first flourishing, etc., etc. So it's again, the appreciative inquiry became quite strong in organizational development. Sustainability, right? Environmental social governance, ESG, integrates sustainability, organization strategies, the frameworks like the triple bottom line that I work with in GrowthOD, growthod.org, with people, planet, profit. But I don't use that simplistic model. If you've read any of my work, I'm pretty critical of triple bottom line. I think we need a little bit more than saying things are three P's. That sort of gives you an idea. And let me talk about where we're going in growthod.org. So we want to pick up that notion of the past of having many participative, valid voices involved, what we call polyphonic. Polyphony, coming from Mikhail Bakhtin, is something we work with in GrowthOD. And we think that many voices is a lot better organizational development approach than the single dominant voice of the CEO. If you look at my other videos, it's about the Sam Walton's ghost and the single dominant voice. And if you can't get the many valid voices involved in organizational change, you're creating a whole wall of resistance that you're going to have to get through to try to impose that monological voice on everybody else. The other thing that we look at is instead of synchronic approaches that take a snapshot of the organization and work in a very narrow time frame, we look at a longer time frame called diachronic. It's a historical from before the industry started, the birth of whatever organization you're working with, where it's aligned in this industry, where that industry is going, and my own work on ANTE narrative, anti-narrative, uh, and the true storytelling principles with Jens Larsen and Lena Brun. We Let me give you an idea of what many valid voices is like in a more diachronic approach. You have action science, action learning, you have action research. That takes a longer time perspective in many cases, so it's more diachronic. It involves listening, interviewing many voices. This good example is the socioeconomic approach to management. Henry Saval and his colleagues, Amandine Saval, Véronique Zardet, Marc Bonnet, from Lyon, France, and around the world. Over 2,000 organizations they've worked with OD with successful results. And again, they elaborated that sociotech added economic and accounting, qualitative and financial and quantitative information and quality metrics. So they're a very dialogic approach in that quadrant. And if we look at the opposite of that, the snapshot approach, single time frame, synchronic, very narrow here now, very single logic. You have one-time surveys, compliance audits, one-way training, expert root cause analysis. Why talk to anybody? Just get an expert to tell you what to do. Efficient, but closure seeking, premature closure. I remember our university, Mexico State University, paid almost $1 million. I think it was to Deloitte, if I recall. And they sent in a few MBAs to give us a quick fix to the university leaking money, and the thing didn't work. It put us in worse shape than we were in. We could have had socioeconomic approach, but we chose this ridiculous approach. There's other approaches that are polyphonic, but at a single time shot, which is the Appreciative Inquiry Summits, the Future Search, Open Spaces. You have a short burst of multiple voices, but it can lack follow through and be kind of lacking the embedded diachronic long-term historical focus. So that gives you some of the approaches. Let's look at the very monologic approach, and it's with this single voice, Lewin's free, unfreeze, change, refreeze, the 8 steps approach to Cotter, very linear. Again, I wouldn't recommend either of those, although I do like a lot of things that Kurt Lewin did to develop participative approaches. So that gives you an idea. Let me give you a quick summary again. So if we do the polyphonic and the synchronic approaches, like uh, and this polyphonic and diachronic. So the synchronic approaches are summits, future search, open spaces, for example. The diachronic across time that are polyphonic. I think GrowthOD, the pillars of GrowthOD, um, affect that very, very much. All of the pillars, the purview, coaching, down to the inner voices, to because people are monologic. You got to deal with them, and coaching is a way to deal with them. And then if you have uh, glow, which stands for gratitude, love, organization of wisdom. It's another approach of consultation with people to help them adapt to these newer models we're talking about. Then we have SEAM, socioeconomic approach to management. I worked 25 years with it. I taught at the university for over 20 years, New Mexico State. Produced a lot of doctoral students and MBAs and undergrads, which got into it with a lot of good projects. Um, so we're interested in that and with the true storytelling principles, um, work with Jens Larsen and Lena Brun. So it takes a more polyphonic approach and across time. Now the synchronic single time shot, future search, open space, etc., and it includes many voices, right? But again, I think the wider longitudinal context is interesting. Monological approaches that are synchronic, a snapshot diagnosis, a single wave of surveys, some compliance audits, get that expert consulting group in there to tell you what to do. I don't think that really works very well. So I wouldn't recommend that. And finally, we have very monological and diachronic. So across time, a single voice. And again, that was Lewin, Cotter's 8 steps, etc. So a little bit more about this. Um, I work a lot with appreciative inquiry in the summits, but I just recommend putting it into a more longitudinal frame. Um, I like working with AI now. How do you teach AI to get along and and learn what we need to learn without it being hallucinogenic? So let me tell you a little bit about the 5 pillars of GrowthOD. Want to close out here. Purview, it's a coaching approach. Develops restoring. How do you restore your life and your organization? Got about 25 years of work into it with Grace Ann Roselle. Glow, gratitude, love, organizational wisdom with gratitude by Tom Lemke, organizational wisdom and love by Olivia Parr Rudd. Socioeconomic approach is the 3rd pillar, and I've talked a lot about that. Souls is a VuJaDé and axiogenics work that I think is really good for doing pre and post tests. I'm getting an idea of what your change is going to be like and actually getting in there and measuring it. If you want to do a deep measurement, auxiliary assumption analysis by David Trofimo, and you look at the auxiliary assumptions that you have in your theory of org change, the assumptions you have in your intervention approach, and you try to deal with, you can't encompass every assumption in a theory. It'd be unwieldy. And you can't test everything, and you can't have everything thing in an intervention. So it's what interventions are you doing? What are the assumptions around them? How are you going to test their efficacy? And if you want that, and you want the new statistics for doing that, you want David Trefimo's work. Finally, there's the true storytelling principles. Um, Being true and having the energy for it, to bring something about, making room for the stories already there. Number two, making spaces, right, for stories, the stories of the future in particular, having timing, space-time mattering in quantum storytelling out of quantum physics. Fifth, helping stories along. How do you help a new story along? We taught you how to do restorying and polyphonic. Now, how do you help stories along? And then staging, number six in true storytelling principles, staging and artifacts. You got to communicate this project to people, and you do it with staging artifacts, maybe a bit of theater. Finally, reflecting on the stories, deep reflection on the ethics of what's going on in your change approach and what you're trying to accomplish. And that about gives you a lineup for what we're doing. My approach here comes from a lot of it when I talk about polyphonic approach and synchronic and diachronic from Mikhail Bakhtin's. His book on the problems of Dostoevsky's poetics. If you want to get scholarly about it, polyphony is the emerged, embodied discourses or stories. So that's about it. I'm going to wrap it up now. Go to growthod.org for more.